Hello, my name is Beverly, and during my marriage to Edward, I was the main financial provider in our household. Although Edward worked and contributed financially, his earnings were much lower than mine, so I ended up covering most of our expenses. I never really minded this arrangement because he was my partner, but I had to draw the line when his mother, Victoria, would ask for handouts. Victoria resented me. She couldn't stand the fact that I earned more than both her son and her husband. She often made hurtful comments suggesting that someone like me, a term she used derogatorily, shouldn't have access to so much money. Luckily, Edward always defended me fiercely against such remarks, and my father-in-law Mason was also a staunch ally. Edward and I shared a strong bond over the years. We decided to get married early because I was financially secure and eager to start a family, a decision Edward fully supported. We lived in a house I had purchased before our marriage. It was mortgaged, but I managed the payments comfortably, which seemed to irk Victoria further. One day, she lashed out, calling it unfair that someone she deemed unworthy, like me, could own such a nice home while her family had to rent. I must admit I am fortunate to own a beautiful home, but I didn't appreciate being called undeserving and unintelligent. Victoria even accused me of advancing in my career by merely flirting, while she claimed men like Edward and Mason were trapped in low-paying jobs simply because of their gender. This accusation was baseless and unfair. Both Edward and my father-in-law quickly came to my defense, asserting that my achievements were due to my intelligence and hard work, not any supposed manipulation. Victoria's jealousy was evident and burdensome, casting a shadow over our family interactions. This ongoing tension, fueled by her resentment, strained relationships within the family, making it clear that her hostility towards me was deep-seated. It was an aspect of my life with Edward that I found increasingly difficult to handle, highlighting the complex dynamics that money and success can introduce into family relationships. I truly wanted Victoria to like me, but her ongoing resentment eventually compelled me to distance myself from her. Despite this, she never ceased asking for favors, which I sometimes granted at Edward's insistence. The real complications began when my mother passed away, leaving me with a significant inheritance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was substantial enough for someone with a middle-class background like myself. Losing my mother was devastating. She was my last living family member, and her death profoundly affected me. During this difficult time, Edward was supportive, but he often brought up my inheritance, which I found increasingly bothersome. He would ask, "Have you thought more about your inheritance? What plans do you have for it?" I had already secured the funds in a separate bank account, and that was all I wanted to deal with at the moment. "Edward, I really can't focus on the inheritance right now. I'm still trying to cope with Mom's death," I would tell him. Despite my distress, Edward persisted, suggesting he was thinking about the inheritance on my behalf to spare me the stress. These conversations became a regular occurrence, and I grew tired of them. Finally, I confronted him to get to the heart of the matter. "Edward, if there's something specific you want to discuss about the inheritance, just say it directly." With that, Edward admitted, "I have an idea. Mom has been looking at houses, but everything she likes is out of her price range. What if we help with the down payment and some furniture?" I was taken aback. "Are you serious, Edward? I'm not going to buy your mother a house. What makes you think that's something I'd agree to?" Edward seemed puzzled by my reaction. "But Beverly, you know my parents are struggling to find something within their budget. Don't you think we should help?" His plea made it clear he didn't fully grasp why I was reluctant to use my inheritance in this way, especially given my fraught relationship with Victoria and my current emotional state. This disagreement highlighted a growing rift in our understanding and respect for one another's perspectives. Victoria found it hard to accept that while she had to settle for less, I lived in such a beautiful home. I suggested that if she was unhappy with her situation, perhaps returning to work could be an option since she had left her job voluntarily. "She can earn her house just as I did," I insisted. I wasn't willing to give up anything to someone who treated me so poorly. This led to a significant argument between Edward and me. However, since the money was my inheritance, Edward had no choice but to back down. My funds were securely in a private account he couldn't access. It wasn't a matter of trust. I was simply devastated that during my period of mourning, he would pressure me to use my late mother's legacy to buy his mother a house. The idea seemed utterly absurd to me. After a while, the argument subsided, and Edward apologized for putting such pressure on me. He promised not to bring it up again, and I, perhaps naively, believed him. He kept to his word, and the issue seemed resolved, especially when Edward mentioned that Victoria had started working again, which meant they could start saving for a house on their own. I was relieved that the conflict was behind us. However, my sense of peace was shattered one night when I overheard Edward talking in his sleep, an occurrence that usually happened when he was stressed. I had grown adept at calming him during these moments, but nothing could have prepared me for what he muttered that night. "Mom, relax. The bimbo will never find out how we spent her inheritance. You're worrying for no reason. I've got it all under control." His mumbled words trailed off into unintelligibility. Hearing him say those things, I felt as if I was trapped in a surreal nightmare, questioning everything I believed about our relationship and his integrity. I needed to understand the situation, but Mason's initial response didn't alleviate my concerns. "Beverly, nothing shady is happening. The house construction is progressing well. Edward has been incredibly supportive, helping us financially. We're almost ready to close the deal." His words caught me off guard. "Wait, what? Edward has been helping you with the payments?" This was completely new to me. I had been under the impression that it was Victoria and Mason who were independently financing their new home. My confusion deepened, and as I processed this revelation, I saw a flicker of realization cross Mason's face. He sensed my shock and questioned, "You seem surprised that Edward is involved financially. Didn't you know?" I responded, still reeling. "No, Mason, I had no idea Edward was contributing. I thought it was just you and Victoria managing on your own." Mason looked as puzzled as I felt. "But Beverly, Edward has been making payments towards the down payment. We're close to finalizing everything." My world spun as I tried to piece everything together. "Mason, are you saying Victoria hasn't gone back to work? I was told she was contributing to the house expenses." Mason's response only added to the turmoil. "No, Beverly, Victoria hasn't returned to work. She's still at home. I don't understand. Where did you get that idea?" It was clear now. Edward had been feeding us both falsehoods. Victoria hadn't resumed working, and the narrative that she was contributing to the household was a fabrication. I confronted the situation head-on. "Mason, something's off. Edward told me Victoria was working, which justified the house payments, but now it appears he's been using my inheritance without my consent to fund these payments." Mason was equally shocked, realizing the gravity of the deceit. "This is all wrong, Beverly. I had no idea Edward was using your money. I thought his financial help was from his savings or a bonus." The layers of lies were unraveling, showing a scheme crafted to mislead both Mason and me. This unexpected conversation with Mason revealed a tangled web of deceit involving my inheritance and a series of lies from my husband and my mother-in-law. What was supposed to be a simple check-in had turned into a moment of stark realization that there were deeper, darker manipulations at play. One night, I overheard Edward talking in his sleep again. He muttered something chilling about how I would never discover what he and Victoria had done with my inheritance. Alarmed, I checked my bank account the next morning and found that a significant portion of my inheritance was missing. This made me suspect that Edward and Victoria were involved in some deceptive act. Confronting Mason, I shared my concerns. "Mason, a lot of my inheritance is missing. Edward isn't earning enough to help with the house down payment, and Victoria mentioned a promotion he supposedly received, but I know he hasn't had any such raise in the last 4 years. Mason was as stunned as I was. "Beverly, If Victoria isn't working and Edward hasn't received a promotion, then where is the money coming from? His question echoed my fears. It seemed increasingly likely that Edward had taken my money without my consent. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Mason shared his dismay. "Oh God, Beverly, you might be right. This doesn't add up." Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to investigate further. First, I need solid evidence that Edward and Victoria orchestrated this plan. I also need to find out how they accessed my private bank account. Mason supported my plan to dig deeper and promised to keep things quiet for now. He is a straightforward man who values living within his means and would not have supported this deception knowingly. Moreover, I discovered that Victoria had also deceived Mason about Edward's financial situation to prevent him from becoming suspicious. As I delved into the situation, I found out it wasn't just a simple case of misunderstanding, but a well-plotted scheme by Edward and Victoria. They had kept both Mason and me in the dark, exploiting us. My investigation revealed that they had indeed made withdrawals from the very bank account where I stored my inheritance. I hadn't set up alerts for transactions, which delayed my discovery of these withdrawals. When I visited the bank to inquire, they told me someone had impersonated me to withdraw funds but couldn't provide further details without a police report. Given Victoria's similar appearance to mine, it wasn't hard to guess how they might have managed this without raising suspicion. I was furious and heartbroken, feeling betrayed by people I was supposed to trust. I confided everything to Mason, who was equally shocked and upset by the revelations. Together, we planned our next steps, determined to confront Edward and Victoria about their deceitful actions. Mason and I devised a plan. He would bring Victoria to our house, while I was already there with Edward, under the guise of a casual family dinner. Neither Edward nor Victoria suspected anything beyond a normal gathering. However, as we settled down for dinner, I decided it was time to confront the issue head-on. "Hey, Edward," I started, feigning calmness. "I discovered something awful yesterday. Someone has withdrawn a significant amount from my bank account, the one where I keep my inheritance." Edward looked startled and asked, "What? Who would do that, Beverly? Which account are you talking about?" Feeling the weight of the moment, I continued, "I'm thinking about calling the police tomorrow." Edward hastily replied, No, why rush into that? Maybe you moved the money or withdrew it by mistake. There's no need to assume the worst." Despite his attempts to deflect, I pressed on. "I've given it enough thought, Edward. I'm very concerned about this missing money. I feel like the only option left is to involve the police." Both Edward and Victoria's faces drained of color, revealing their shock and fear. It was evident to Mason and me that they hadn't anticipated their scheme unraveling so quickly, nor did they expect me to act on it so decisively. They were visibly shaken, nearly jumping from their chairs in panic at the mention of police involvement. Mason, maintaining his composure but with a hint of irony, looked at Victoria and chimed in, "I don't see why Beverly shouldn't call the police immediately. The sooner this is resolved, the better." Edward tried to intervene. "Dad, these are sensitive matters, especially since it's about money. Beverly's already vulnerable. Let's not add to her stress." I countered, firm and resolute. "Actually, I am stressed about the money. I want it back in my account as soon as possible. I think I will file that police report." Seeing my determination, Mason supported me. "Go ahead, Beverly. You have every right to get your money back. And since you're in such a vulnerable state, I'll accompany you to the police station." Edward and Victoria exchanged desperate glances, their anxiety mounting as they realized the gravity of the situation. I watched them. Part of me wanted to laugh at their desperate reactions, the very trap they set for me closing in around them. But my overriding feeling was anger at their deceit and the audacity of their actions. I was ready to see this through, to reclaim what was rightfully mine and hold them accountable for their betrayal. Despite numerous attempts to resolve the situation amicably, I finally reached my limit. "I don't see any reason to delay this any longer," I declared, feeling a mixture of frustration and resolve. "I'm going to the police for sure." Edward tried to calm me down. "Beverly, don't be so rash. Why don't you just sleep on it for a few days?" "No, I can't do that," I replied firmly. "The more I think about it, the more it bothers me. In fact, why don't we just go to the police station right now? It's only 4 p.m. We can sort this out and still be back in time for dinner." Mason and I were already heading for the door when Edward and Victoria, realizing that their secrets were unraveling, stopped us in our tracks. It was clear they understood they were caught, and it was time to come clean. They both looked guilty and ashamed as they confessed to their plan of using my inheritance to fund their house purchase. "Why, Edward? Why did you do this?" I asked, my voice heavy with disappointment. Edward looked down, struggling with his conscience. "I've always wanted to buy a house for my parents, but I knew I couldn't afford it," he admitted. "I asked you for help, Beverly, but when you said no, I felt like I had no other choice. I just wanted to do something nice for my parents." "What you did was wrong, Edward," I responded sternly. "We never asked for luxury. It seems like Victoria was the one pushing for a big house." Victoria, defiant yet cornered, retorted sharply, "All I wanted was a decent home like my son's. If Beverly can live in such a house, why can't I?" Her callous words stung, but I remained composed. "Be careful, Victoria. You've committed serious offenses by stealing from me. Remember, I can still go to the police and have you arrested." The reality of the legal ramifications began to sink in for Victoria as her demeanor shifted from aggression to desperation. Even after being caught, her attitude had been venomous, but now, faced with the potential consequences of her actions, her facade began to crack. As tensions at the dinner table escalated, Victoria attempted to appeal to family ties. "We are family, so let's just forgive each other. There's no reason to get the cops involved," she pleaded, her voice softening. Edward echoed his mother's sentiment. "Mom is right, Beverly. She's still your family. You shouldn't be threatening her like this." Irritated by his words, I retorted, "Oh, you have a problem with me threatening your mother, Edward? Well, guess what? I can threaten you too. If I make a police complaint, you'll be arrested as well, and I don't think Mason will be here to bail any of you out." The realization that I was serious hit them hard. At that moment, I knew I needed to distance myself as far as possible from Edward and Victoria. "After today, I want nothing to do with either of you. Victoria's sense of entitlement has always been an issue, but this time she crossed a line. I've decided to separate from this toxicity." Mason, sharing a look of resignation, agreed. "I guess we'll both be consulting divorce lawyers soon. I'm done with this, Edward. Don't think you can simply get away with this. You and your mother insulted me, calling me a bimbo and trying to intimidate me when I was most vulnerable. Now you'll see what happens when you push me too far." The fear in Edward and Victoria's eyes was palpable. They had not anticipated the day would spiral into their worst nightmare. Victoria, now desperate, begged Mason not to leave her, while Edward, on the verge of tears, tried to catch my attention as I started to walk away. Sorry, he stammered repeatedly, hoping for forgiveness. They even promised to return the money in hopes of restoring normalcy. I could only laugh at their naive hope for a simple resolution and walked away without responding. The final act of the drama unfolded just as they thought they might persuade me to reconsider. A knock at the door interrupted us. Edward, pale-faced, opened it to find 3 police officers ready to make arrests. That's right. I had already called the police and filed a report earlier that morning. There was no room left for compromise or reconciliation. As the officers escorted them away, the finality of their choices became undeniably clear, and the consequences they faced were now inescapable. As soon as I found the courage to end my marriage, I proceeded with the police report. Mason supported my decision and accompanied me. Victoria and Edward threw tantrums as they were escorted to the police cars, but their outbursts fell on deaf ears. Due to certain complications, both spent the night in jail. Edward managed to secure his release the next day by posting bail from his funds, but Victoria remained incarcerated as Mason chose not to bail her out. Upon his return, Edward pleaded with me to reconsider our separation, but my decision was firm. I had already contacted a lawyer to start the divorce proceedings and was moving forward with my legal case against them for identity theft and document forgery. Edward eventually transferred my money back after his release, which I reported to the police, but the criminal case remained active. Victoria was eventually bailed out by other family members, yet her situation remained bleak as Mason pursued a divorce. Living in a no-fault divorce state meant that both our divorces would likely be straightforward, focusing on irreconcilable differences without needing to prove fault. Edward and Victoria now face the possibility of minor prison sentences and significant fines due to their actions. They find themselves isolated, with their marital partners choosing to leave them, and their relationship with each other has deteriorated to the point of silence. They blame each other for their downfall. Their scheme not only failed to bring them the security and happiness they sought, but ultimately led to their separation and legal troubles. As this chapter of my life closes, it's clear that their deceitful plan brought them more misfortune than either had anticipated.